Okay, Cree, whenever you're ready.
And hug you and squeeze you and kiss you and put coins in your eyes. That's why we gonna be kids next door forever. I am Kiragakash. Welcome to the city of Atlantis. Angelica, you know that you're mean to those babies, and I've had enough. I will not let you bother them again.
Works for me. This is Cree Summer, and her voice, it's kind of legendary.
I am best known for being Penny from Inspector Gadget.
Ballroom Brain, they look suspicious. Inspector Gadget, are you all right?
Susie Carmichael.
Who really stood up to Angelica and took care of those babies. And I play Elma was wonderful.
Princess Kida from the Lost City of Atlantis. Loki Gone. There you go. There's the taste of some of my greatest hits.
I knew Uncle Gadget would never rob a bank.
Let's see, I started voice acting when I was 11 years old. My father, Don Franks, was the voice of Sabretooth from the X-Men. He also was the very first person to ever voice Boba Fett from Star Wars, which is such a cool-ass thing. And he had already been cast on Inspector Gadget, and he asked if they would be kind enough to read his daughter. And they said, sure, we'll give her a shot. And it literally took off like wildfire from there.
Hi, my name's Susie. What's yours?
I know for Susie, one of the most important things was that she sound smart and that she's very well spoken, because there were not a lot of brown girls in cartoons. As a matter of fact, there still aren't.
Beyond all this, Cree is unique for another reason. Historically, white voice actors generally did the voices for cartoon characters of all races. Cree has thrived in a space that has often overlooked people who look like her.
Ow, come on in, boys. I just put on some mothballs.
What if some talent agent comes along and says I have...
I mean, let's face it, I do the voices of all the brown girls, and all the animated brown girls. There still ain't that many. Because there's this really crazy belief that black girls don't watch cartoons, and that we don't collect comics, and that we don't like sci-fi. And that's BS, man. We love it. I love when people of color come up to me and say, you don't know what it meant to me to see myself in a cartoon. I got one little black girl that I get to see that looks like me. Thank you so much. Oh, I get off on that. It's great.
There's this amazing picture of my coworker. It's him reading a Ninja Turtles book lying next to a Super Soaker. When the Super Soaker came out, it was a game changer. The slogan, "Wetter is better," was essentially a mantra for kids during summer break. So when I went to Atlanta to interview the guy responsible for all that, I had to show him the photo.
That's funny.
Lonnie Johnson invented the Super Soaker back in 1982. But that is not his only invention.
Well, I have over 100 patents.
Everything from the Nerf gun to a thermoelectric energy converter. He also worked on NASA's Galileo mission to Jupiter and alongside the US military.
The first Super Soaker actually I made in my shop in my basement in the evenings when I would come home from work. And at the time I was actually working on the stealth bomber program back when it was highly classified. And I actually couldn't even tell my wife what I was working on during the daytime. It was that top secret.
The original name for the Super Soaker was the Drencher.
We ran into a challenge regarding the name because another inventor claimed it. So we changed the name to Super Soaker just to avoid having to deal with that.
Super Soaker is definitely a way better name. When he started, Lonnie wasn't trying to create a toy for kids.
I was working on a new type of heat pump that would use water as a working fluid instead of Freon. And I was experimenting with some nozzles that I machined. And I shot a stream of water across the bathroom, and I thought, geez, maybe I should put this hard science stuff aside and work on something fun like a water gun. It still works.
And this brings me back to a previous point. Lonnie Johnson is a super genius scientist. This is his lab. And this is what he's working on now.
Yeah, right now I'm working on advanced battery technology. My goal is to develop a battery that will store about 3 times the energy of a lithium-ion battery.
In comparison, the Super Soaker might not seem as hard science, but it was still a really, really important invention.
Nearly everyone remembers Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
It's a beautiful day in this.
But not everyone knows that this cardigan-clad king of children's TV, Fred Rogers, was actually a pioneer who challenged racial stereotypes in media. Enter Francois Clemens.
Francois Scarborough Clemens.
And his role as Officer Clemens made him one of the first recurring black characters on a children's TV show.
When I started, there were 2-3 shows, period, on television that employed a black character.
Francois grew up during the Civil Rights Movement and times of great racial tension in the U.S.
So when Fred asked me to be a police officer, Fred, are you sure? Do you know what policemen represent in the community where I was raised? And then he started talking about children needing helpers and the positive influence that I could have for young children. My heart opened as I listened to him.
He accepted the role, not knowing he would end up playing Officer Clemens for 30 years. And one of his most memorable scenes is also one of his favorites.
There are many ways to say I love you. It's a very big deal for me to be putting my feet in the water with Fred.
During a time of segregation, the symbolism wasn't lost on Francois.
To say that he didn't know what he was doing or that he accidentally stumbled into integration or talking about racism or sexism, that's not Mr. Rogers. It was well planned and well thought out, and I think it was very impactful. There are many ways to say I love you.
That impact was felt by many, but for Francois, it was personal.
I was in the studio one day. That particular day, he was filming the end of the show. And when he got to the part, he said, "You make every day a special day."
You know how? By just your being you.
And I swear it was like, he was looking right into my eyes. And when the music stopped, I said, "Fred, were you talking to me?" And he said, "Yes, I have been talking to you for years, but you heard me today."
The Dismal Swamp is an environment that has hazardous conditions associated with it. The heat, you got poisonous snakes and mosquitoes come out at certain times of the year and it's unbearable. But when you think about some of the torture the enslaved people endured, I think if most of us were living during that day and we had an option to go in the swamp and live freely, I think a lot of us would take that option.
From the 17th century until the Civil War, escaped slaves, known as Maroons, found refuge in the Great Dismal Swamp. Located on the border of Virginia and North Carolina, the swamp was wild and inhospitable. Nevertheless, it was there that runaways created self-sufficient communities, almost entirely cut off from the outside world. For the past 10 years, archaeologist Dan Sayers from American University has been studying these settlements.
Part of what I did was develop this sort of research program called the Great Dismal Swamp Landscape Study. Most of my focus has been on archaeological discovery of sites out in the swamp, as well as historical research, and then of course trying to understand it. Before we started our research, there was a sense people lived in the swamp for a variety of reasons, but we really wanted to go in the swamp and find remnants of their lives out there. And sure enough, we've been able to look at several sites associated with several of these different groups.
Probably in 1790 to 1825 or 30 nail that we found in one of the resistance community settlements.
I'm sure the population went up and down, but very strong potential for any given moment for thousands of people that went out in the Great Dismal and formed these multi-generational communities. It was a radical form of resistance in a good way.
The runaways who escaped slavery risked everything to be free, even if it meant living in the harsh environment of the swamp. One former slave who briefly lived in the swamp was a man named Moses Grandy.
I've done family genealogy research in which I've uncovered a slave narrative by Moses Grandy, who I believe is my great-great-grandfather's uncle. That's Edmund Grandy, my great-great-grandfather's headstone, who was born in 1827. He was a waterman and a boatsman on the Dismal Swamp Canal, which was being hand-dug. And he describes very vividly in the slave narrative how they were treated, what they endured, how they were tortured. If you had that kind of experience and you had an opportunity to come out to the swamp and live freely under, challenging conditions, you're gonna have a hard time getting them out of there. The idea of Africans setting up communities and being in charge of their destiny in the swamp, I don't want people to ever forget this history.